I don't think it's unusual to say that FromSoft over the years have designed bosses that would not feel misplaced inside a horror game. Whether it be their physical appearance, lore, behavior, sound design, or all the above, I think some of the most terrifying bosses I've encountered come from these games. Keep in mind, folks, I love horror games, but there's something special about FromSoftware's design. Perhaps it's because you don't really expect them in these type of games, or maybe you do, but they go beyond your expectations. Like, I knew that cosmic horror was going to play a big role in Bloodborne, although I did not expect a shriveled up old hag covered in eyeballs. I'll talk about her later. We're going to talk about the bosses that I personally found terrifying in their own ways, and we're going to highlight some themes or a subgenre of horror that they excel at, and why it's so effective. The last boss on this list is, without question, my personal favorite, and what actually inspired me to make this video. So if you enjoy, consider subscribing and liking the video for more content like this. For now, let's start with perhaps the most obvious game for this topic. Bloodborne is already categorized as a horror game by many because it explores the themes of Lovecraftian and Gothic horror profoundly. Almost every single boss in this game is terrifying in their own ways, but there is a select few I do want to talk about. I know I said I would talk about them later, but you know what? Let's talk about them now. The Witches of Hemwick. They're a pretty good display of body horror. Body horror can be defined simply as the grotesque and disturbing violation, transformation, or decay of the human body. I mean, just look in the mirror. The Witches of Hemwick perform disturbing, twisted rituals that require an absurd amount of eyeballs. In Bloodborne, the eyes are akin to insight, enlightenment. The more you have, the closer you are to ascension. Their old ragged cloaks are covered in eyeballs from the dead and living, linking grave robbing with powerful magic. If you get grabbed by them, they will attempt to literally scoop out your eyes with a utensil specific for that purpose. Now, they're not exactly a tough boss fight, but their mysterious purpose and grotesque design is more than enough to talk about. Beyond their obsession with eyeballs, witchcraft is a well-known fear, a fear of black magic. Whatever their rituals are, we know for certain it cannot be for a good reason. I mean, the Salem witch trials from 1692 to 1693 in Massachusetts is proof enough that this type of magic was feared, either for religious reasons or mass hysteria. While the Hemwick witches are great, there are some absolutely gross boss designs in Bloodborne that make these pretty ladies look like the front picture of an elderly home pamphlet. Now, there are two I want to highlight here. The One Reborn and Ludwig the Accursed. Both of these boss fights, I think, are the pinnacle of body horror in the entire FromSoft catalog. Exhibit A, the One Reborn drops from a literal portal of flesh and is a repulsive amalgamation of bodies, fused together in an unholy ritual. I think it's safe to assume, I think it's safe to assume that whatever ritual they performed in Yahar'gul, it was a total failure. Ludwig carries on the theme of enlightenment by having a secondary mouth filled with eyeballs. The opening cinematic highlights this very well for us, and it's gross, but I love it. He's also a disturbing fusion of man and horse. His elongated horse-like face is mangled in such a way that evokes a primal fear, with hooves sprouting from various places on his body, hunched over in such a way that shows a painful figure. Both are, of course, covered in blood, and Ludwig is fought in a room filled with blood. I mean, this game is called Bloodborne. What'd you expect? I don't need to go into full detail as to why both bosses have amazing physical designs that are truly some of the most horrifying bosses I've seen. What makes them even better is the sound design. Hear me out on this. The One Reborn, when casting spells, will make guttural grunts and whispers as he drops corpses on your character. Personally, one of my favorite things about this boss. Ludwig screams violently throughout the entire first phase, thrashing around like a caged animal. The One Reborn does kind of thrash out himself. I mean, all it can really do is flail with what little control it has over the body parts near you. But what really makes these bosses terrifying are the lore implications. The One Reborn was a failed experiment of Yahar'gul. They likely were attempting to create their own Great One, kidnapping people with snatchers to take a part in their ritual. Of course, it would never work. Ludwig was once a holy knight of the church, but after spilling so much blood of the beasts, he succumbed to his own bloodlust, taking on the form of a beast he once swore to destroy. It's pretty amazing to see how Bloodborne's story resulted in such disgusting creatures. Experimentation is such a perfect theme for horror in many games because the result, whether it's successful or not, is always terrifying. Whenever you see people trying to play God when they're not, it never ends well. The living failures are a prime example of the horror behind experimentation. And you know what? I don't really care what people say. I love this boss fight. They are the byproduct of a failed experiment conducted by the Healing Church, who attempted to transform human subjects into Great Ones, or Celestial Emissaries. They have become malformed, with giant bulbous heads that lack any features. Long, slender limbs dangle from their disproportionate bodies. They have become nothing more than a tragic example of the Church's deadly pursuit for knowledge. I think their design, fight, and lore are all great. Of course, it's not the best encounter in the game, but it's one that I still very much enjoy. Even if you didn't understand the lore behind this boss fight, their design alone is enough to evoke such a reaction. The living failures are humanoid in structure, but have lacking and exaggerated features that can leave the player disturbed. To be fair, I don't think they're total failures. They can summon meteors with hands uplifted, so I think that garners some praise. FromSoft loves body horror, not just because it looks cool, but the lore implications can explain why the boss looks the way it does. And in certain cases, the reasoning behind the design is all the more terrifying. I mean, I could keep going with Bloodborne. I did skip over the screaming fetus man, but I think that's enough for now. So let's pivot towards one of my favorite games of all time, and probably yours too if you're watching this video. Elden Ring is a phenomenal game, one where you can create the most handsomest character alive, explore vast regions, and beat up the elderly. However, there is more to this old man than what I've just shown you. As a matter of fact, Midra, Lord of the Frenzied Flame, is the next boss on this list. Now, I want you to understand first the build-up that led to this fight. Before we even set foot inside the manse, you have to traverse through, arguably, the scariest area in the entire game, the Abyssal Woods. Now, it does kind of lose its novelty after the first run, but it's still a memorable location. Torrent retreats and refuses to come back out because he is terrified. You must carefully avoid the gaze of an unkillable enemy known as the Aging Untouchables. Now, they are touchable, but for the sake of keeping the tension here, let's pretend they're not. Finally, you come across Midra's Manse, a decrepit place with headless bodies decorating the front entrance. You can hear Midra's wails of agony as you venture deeper in, and then you finally find him. An old man with a holy sword penetrating his upper torso. He's gone mad from his own torment. When you finally push him down, the cutscene that follows is one of the most disturbing, yet one of my favorite cutscenes in the entire game. Midra's reveal as this false Lord of Frenzy is done extraordinarily well. The tone shift in this fight is dramatic, to say the least. The music becomes this horrific choir that amplifies the fear of going against this otherworldly being. Midra is a great example of subverting expectations and proper use of gore in a horror experience. At this point, you're a seasoned player, so you know that there's more to this boss than when you first find him, but to see him rip off his own head to reveal the frenzied flame was unexpected. Unless you watch the trailer. This is one of my favorite bosses in the game, and is one of the most horrific experiences Elden Ring has to offer. Of course, we're just getting started. Elden Ring has plenty of bosses that reflect a subgenre of horror known as cosmic horror. Bloodborne has plenty of this too, but I wanted to save this specifically for one boss, Meter, Mother of Fingers. The reason why is simple, because out of all the cosmic beings in FromSoft, I think Meter is my favorite from a design perspective. She is a melding of fingers, her own head representing a giant thumb, grafted together in ways that really make no sense. At the end of her tail is a microcosm, her way of communicating outside to the greater will. She is the first daughter of the greater will, the first star to fall upon the lands between. Not only is she the mother of the two fingers we see in the Round Table hold, she's also the mother of the finger creepers. Her design is creepy enough, but the cosmic horror comes from her lore and abilities. She is an incomprehensible ancient being tied to the greater will, something far beyond human logic or morality. The fingers themselves, once seen as holy, are revealed to be biological, grotesque, and possibly mistaken, reinforcing the idea that faith is built on something unknowable and wrong. The greater will has been silent for a very long time, and yet, Meter still pleads for as much as a whisper from this outer entity. Her powers are otherworldly, there's really no explanation behind it, and that's what makes her truly terrifying. Because cosmic horror deals a lot with the unknown, and there's a lot left in the dark with Meter. The excessive fingers definitely play a role in body horror as well, and I freaking love it. The arena plays heavily into her alien nature too, and it's easily one of my favorite arenas in FromSoft. There are other cosmic beings, of course, in Elden Ring, such as Estelle or the Falling Star Beast, but let's look towards a more grounded type of horror, the horror of putrescence. I love how this boss is introduced. There's no grand cutscene, no major music score to indicate an epic fight, just a giant skeleton silently riding a blind, crippled horse from the other side of this deep purple garden. Putrescence is the result of ill-practiced burial rituals. Those who lived sinfully were burnt by the ghost flames of deathbirds and stuffed inside the stone coffins where you find this boss. Due to their impure lives, their bodies would leak this ooze and drip into the flower gardens below, forming into this restless servant of Saint Trina, the Putrescent Knight. This boss is both tragic and horrifying because he's basically the remnant of the dead who lived worthless, and now they have to serve eternally without a choice. His design is really good too. It's a giant malformed skeleton, again, riding on the back of what looks to be a melting, sickly horse. Putrescence literally means to rot, so the horror of decay is something that this boss represents well. Of course, there are others who do that well. I mean, Melania, goddess of rot. But again, this is yet another boss that I truly love that I think does not get enough credit. Encountering a boss in the Soul series can be quite the uncanny experience, because usually there's no cutscene or build-up. It's just kind of there, existing behind a fog wall. In a lot of horror games, there's a cinematic or small cutscene to properly show off the boss's design. So imagine with me, you're exploring the world of Sekiro, just traveling along. Unlike Bloodborne, your expectations are low for encountering something that needs therapy to explain afterwards. When all of a sudden, you stumble across a mini-boss known simply as Headless, a bloated, corrupted spirit of an ancient warrior who fought for its kingdom long ago. Unlike most other enemies, your regular attacks won't do you much good here. Divine Confetti is heavily suggested for this fight, as it deals significant damage to ghost-type enemies. Its design alone will certainly catch your attention, but it's the inspiration that I thought was the most fascinating. The Headless are inspired by kappas, Japanese water spirits with a mischievous nature. They would lure all kinds of people and animals into the water and steal their shirikodama. Hopefully I said that right, but it's an organ said to contain the soul, which is near the anus. Which is why, if you are grabbed by Headless, it steals said organ, and then promptly shoves it up its own brown cave. It's cool to see, not that, but how disturbing this game's interpretation of the kappa is. And then there's Pokemon, whose kappa-inspired design is Ludicolo, a dancing Mexican duck. I just think it's a cool comparison. Headless in Sekiro has great shock value because, for a majority of the game, you're fighting samurai or skillful blade masters that wield a variety of weapons. But there's an undertone of spiritual influence, which is reflected in bosses like the Corrupted Monk or Headless. They come out of nowhere, and I can certainly imagine Headless being in tight corridors chasing the player in dark rooms, and that would be terrifying. Finally, we arrive in Dark Souls. Now, the horror behind this entire series revolves around a never-ending cycle. One could say, the definition of insanity, where we can never change the fate of the world, only linger on for a little while longer, either by linking the fire or ushering an age of dark. Now, in this never-ending cycle, we've seen characters gone mad for means that either relate to this or not. I could talk about the fallen gods or champions that failed. What I want to talk about is a tree that went mad. The Curse-Rotted Greatwood is a boss that I do not like. It's one of my least favorite bosses in the entire series, but something that I learned recently was the lore, and I found it to be incredibly fascinating. So here's the basic summary. In the undead settlement filled with malicious and violent residents, they would worship this giant tree. But more than that, they would pour all their hate, curses, and evil thoughts into its roots. Eventually, their curses would manifest physically onto the tree, creating this cursed greatwood. The fact that the residents were so evil and so consistent in dumping their malicious prayers onto this tree that it became evil itself is crazy to me. Everyone at 6 a.m. gathers around the greatwood for their daily trauma dump session. It's this giant bulbous tree with pus-filled blemishes, and in the second phase, a giant hand erupts from the front. It is a gross boss in design, and one that I think is a good representation of horror behind witchcraft and curses. It's nothing regal or natural, it's merely a now evil spirit that needs to be put to rest. Another boss in Dark Souls 3 that I think fits here is Wolnir. After all of what I've talked about thus far, yeah, he is just kind of a giant skeleton, but he's a giant skeleton inside the abyss. I think it's creepy enough to talk about. I mean, skeletons in general are not seen as epic or cool in Dark Souls. They're just a byproduct of war and death. And the fact that they still rise up once more in defiance against the natural way of things is quite disturbing. Gravelord Nito is another example. Akin to the Grim Reaper in mythology, Nito was surprisingly scary the first time I fought him, and then every other time was very annoying. But it's more than just that. When we fight Wolnir, it's inside the Abyss. The Abyss in Dark Souls is this supernatural realm or force that absorbs anything and everything. It was born from the Dark Soul, and I think the scariest thing Dark Souls has to offer is this realm of darkness. You fight the four kings inside the Abyss as well, but here your perception of depth is gone. You are forced to fight the four kings in a DPS check in complete darkness. Fighting anything in a void is a terrifying experience, especially when you first encounter them and it's 3 AM in the morning. Now, let's finally talk about the boss that inspired this video. The Balancers are one of the newest bosses in Elden Ring Night Rain. I'm sure a lot of you know where this is going. One of the things that adds to the potential horror behind these bosses is the lack of information behind them. All we really get is their relic descriptions, and that's it. There's not much known about the Balancers and their nature. A couple weeks later, we got the Everdark versions, and what proceeded to happen was one of the most shocking and disturbing moments I've seen in a FromSoft game. I can't even begin to describe what just happened. Again, we have no lore or reasoning behind this. It just happens. The first thing I noticed was the arena, a complete makeover, scattered piles of flesh and rot everywhere. The second thing I noticed was the noise the Balancers started to make. That is the most skin-crawling sound I've heard from a boss in these games. The whispering from the one reborn is kind of funny, but here, it's just pure nightmare fuel. The gargling kind of indicates that they're in some sort of pain constantly. Their erratic, twitchy movements compared to how graceful they were before is jaw-dropping. Really what makes them horrifying to me is the complete shift that occurs. You'd never expect it. It's almost like a jump scare in a way. Well, I'm not gonna go that far. But it gets even crazier because when you beat up a good number of them, they transform into this disgusting, bloated, worm-like creature reminiscent of Aldrich from Dark Souls 3. I mean, this whole fight is insane. The background, the aura of the whole fight, it's disgusting. And if I'm honest, the Everdark Balancers are scarier than a lot of horror game monsters I've encountered. I love everything about this boss fight, from their design, the audio, music, movement. Everything plays beautifully into their horrific nature. And those are just some of the most terrifying bosses in FromSoft. I could easily make a part 2, but for now I think that about does it. I would love to hear about your favorite scary boss fights from the series, and if you want a part 2, just let me know. And if you did enjoy, be sure to leave a like and to subscribe for more content like this. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care everyone, and of course, stay safe.